How's it going, everybody? Jeremy Senpai here, and just a little while ago, I gave you all a poll. Well, not really a poll, more like I gave you guys a question. How would you rank the Straw Hats based on their backstories? Or in layman's terms, who do you think had the saddest backstory, and who do you think had the not so bad backstory? So I came up with an idea and a solution, and very interestingly, I've discovered that nobody on YouTube has ever ranked the Straw Hats backstories. I mean, yeah, there are people who have ranked all the backstories, but never just about the Straw Hats. So, yeah, I'm going to do that just here. We're going to do a tier list based on the 10 Straw Hats that we have currently, Luffy to Jinbe, and we're going to see who had the saddest backstory and who had the kind of sad but still not so sad backstory. And no, we're not going to include additional characters like Law, Kuma, Hancock, Doflamingo, among others, because honestly, they kind of deserve a tier list all their own, especially when we discover more about other characters, because I'm sure that Sakazuki, Akainu, and Blackbeard have sad little backstories of their own that'll make us feel bad for them and completely forget everything that they did. But for now, we are talking about our favorite band of misfits, the Straw Hat Crew. So, without further ado, let's get into it. We are ranking the 10 Straw Hats, starting now. Alright everyone, here we are at the tier list. Now, before we get started, I'm going to explain how this ranking is going to work. Basically, we're going to take the 10 Straw Hats that we have, and we're going to rank them in 10 separate spots, one spot per Straw Hat. Basically, if your backstory is the saddest and most devastating, then you go in the S rank, and if your backstory isn't so bad, well then you just, go lower into the I ranking, I guess. I didn't really pick any specific ranking or tier for this or anything. I just kind of, I'm ranking them accordingly. So you get the idea. Top spot means saddest backstory, and you know what? S can be for saddest, while I can be for, I don't know. That's literally what I mean, I don't know. If you guys have any ideas, then just go ahead. But this is going to be kind of an unofficial, not really. This is just kind of for fun and something to speculate, you know? Okay, without further ado, let's get into it. And we are starting with our captain, Luffy. So, let's see. Luffy does have a bit of a mixed backstory. And let's see, where did I have Luffy in mind? I'm going to put Luffy in D, which is the 5th. Because, yeah, Luffy does have about 2, kind of 3 backstories when you really think about it. First, Luffy watches Shanks, the man that he greatly admires, lose his arm protecting Luffy. But this is also what helps Luffy too, because Luffy is given Shanks' straw hat, which we later find out is Roger's, and the two make the promise that Luffy will become king of the pirates and return the hat to Shanks after he becomes a great pirate. But then we get tragedy again and again. For example, then we get to the whole Marineford arc thing, where unfortunately Luffy does go to protect Ace, and sadly Ace dies protecting Luffy. And even worse, this happens right in front of Luffy. Ace dies protecting him, and this was the very first time Luffy, I meant Luffy, damn it. This is the first time Luffy ever almost considered dropping his dream, ever giving up on his dream, because he was plunged into despair. He even said himself, if I can't protect Ace, there's no way I can become king of the pirates. And then we get a nice little backstory flashback where we see Ace and Luffy grow up together, and Luffy gets to meet Sabo, who becomes the unofficial third brother. They literally exchange sake cups, becoming blood brothers. And for 12 years, no, 10 years, No, it is 12. It is 12. Time skip. For 12 years, Luffy thought Sabo was dead because of the whole thing with the celestial dragon. Sabo wanted to go out to sea before he would become legal age and be forced to marry by his domineering parents. But unfortunately, he crosses paths with a world noble, a celestial dragon. And in doing so, he is blown up, and for 12 years, both Luffy and Ace believed that Sabo was dead. And what's even more disturbing when you think about it, Ace died before he ever discovered that Sabo was alive. I mean, spoiler alert, Sabo wasn't alive. He was alive, okay? I keep mixing things up. Sabo was alive, he was saved by Luffy's father, Dragon, and spent the next 12 years as a revolutionary. So this is where I'm going to justify this a bit. Luffy kind of has about 3 backstories. So, yeah, it's pretty devastating. It is horrible to lose both your brothers. So, which is why, but some of these other backstories are a bit sadder, which is a bit worse. So, Luffy really does make the cut here down the middle. That's probably the best I could think of when it comes to Luffy. Alright, let me refresh real quick. Okay, moving on. Next up is the Vice Captain, no Zoro. And this might be a bit of an unpopular take when it comes to Zoro, but I'm gonna put Zoro at the bottom. Hear me out, okay? Okay, for Zoro's backstory, he wants to become the world's greatest swordsman. And he challenged a dojo. Granted, this was done more in the anime as opposed to the manga. In the manga, Zoro has actually lived in the village and been a student at the dojo. In fact, he even implies that he's a distant relative of the owners of the dojo, but anyway, he challenges his childhood friend and rival, Kuina. And after a year training there and 2,000 losses at Kuina, Zoro challenges her to a real duel with swords, with real katanas. And again, Kuina beats him, her 2001st win. And Kuina starts to tell Zoro that even though he lost, eventually he would become stronger. That eventually boys would become stronger than girls. However, Zoro shoots back, telling her that she is his goal. How does this make me feel? And forces her to promise that one day, one of them will become the greatest swordsman in the world. And Kuina and Zoro make their promise. However, sadly, the very next day, Zoro receives the news from some of his classmates that Kuina is dead. Apparently Kuina was looking for a sharpening rock for her katana, and she fell down the storehouse stairs. Yeah. I mean, nothing... And they even say it in the anime and the manga, that sometimes you don't know what life is going to bring. You don't know what's around the next corner. And Zoro is handling her death the best he can. He is losing it. He is training harder than ever, kind of getting his frustrations out. That is until Kuina's father, their sensei, takes Zoro aside and tells Zoro Kuina's dream. And even tells Zoro that as her father, he was proven wrong. And Zoro very tearfully asks Kuina's father, give me her sword. If she can't do it, then I'll do it for both of us. And Kojiro, Kuina's father and Zoro's sensei, hands over Kuina's sword so he can fulfill the promise. So, yeah, this might be a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I just don't think Zoro's backstory is the tear-jerking sad compared to some of the others. Yeah, losing your best friend, especially at a young age, especially after the two of you made this life-changing promise for your dream, that is pretty bad. That is pretty devastating. But compared to some of the other Straw Hats, it just doesn't seem that bad for me, at least. And just an interesting thing I thought I would point out. When 4Kids dubbed One Piece in America, obviously they had to cut out all sorts of things like violence and blood, smoking, drinking, etc. When we get to the part where Zoro's classmates tell him that Kuina's dead, they instead tell them they instead tell Zoro that a man and his friends beat up Kuina to the point where she can't be a swordsman anymore. And the reason why he did this is because he lost to a girl. Now, keep in mind here, this is 4Kids. They just changed a few things. They didn't show it, or anything like that. That's not what happened originally. But that's actually a bit darker when you really think about it. The fact that a grown man and his friends, who I'm assuming are adults too, crippled a girl who looks like she's 12 years old because he lost to her in a sparring match. That is dark. 4Kids might have actually done something a bit darker compared to the original story. Because, yeah, Kuina tripped and fell down the stairs, and I'm assuming that she didn't suffer. It was a tragic accident. But the fact that she is beaten in 4Kids to the point that she can't be a swordsman anymore. And keep in mind here, 4Kids, hence the name, tried to change this so it's more age appropriate for kids. I don't know what they were thinking when they came up with that idea, but man, just man. Also, what's truly interesting is that in 4Kids, we never see Kuina again. Yeah, there's that little flashback scene, but that was kept in the original too. But Kuina never interacts with Zoro. She doesn't wish him luck when he leaves for his journey. She doesn't give him any words of encouragement because, like I said, in the original story, she's dead. But in 4Kids, she's implied to be alive, she just can't be a swordsman anymore. So it's just kind of that thing that even as a kid watching 4Kids, I noticed. Just an interesting fact I thought I would include. Anyway, Zoro is bottom tier for me. I'm not saying that it's not devastating to lose your best friend and your rival at a young age. I'm just saying that compared to some of the other Straw Hats and what they went through, it's not that bad, which I'm not sure if that's a good thing. Anyway, moving on. Okay. Number 3. Number 3 is our cat burglar, Nami. And Nami, I'm actually gonna put her above Luffy. Okay, Nami's backstory. She was born, I'm assuming born as a baby into a war zone. I mean, I'm assuming it wasn't always a war zone, but the earliest that we see Nami, she's a baby being carried by her future adopted sister, Nojiko. They are both adopted by the only surviving Marine, Bellemere. Eventually, they make their way back to Kokoyashi Village, where Bellemere is from. And both Nami and Nojiko are adopted by Bellemere. And even though they were financially strained at times, they still had a very good life. Yeah, Nami was a bit of a rascal, getting into trouble, stealing books, among other things, I'm sure, but she did all this so she could try to craft her navigation skills at the ripe age of 10 years old. And Bellemere and Nojiko were both very supportive of her. Keep that in mind. Nami's lifelong dream is to make a map of the entire world, and she could definitely pull that off. That is until Arlong comes along. Arlong and his pirates, his fishman pirates, they take over Kokoyashi Village and make it their base for the next few years. And in doing so, they tax the citizens every month. They tax them with 5,000 berries, with 5,000 berries for every child, 10,000 berries for every child, for every adult, 5,000 per child, 10,000 per adult, and they do this every month. Eventually, they make their way to Belmir's house, where Belmir is quickly overpowered despite being a former Marine, and she only has $10,000 on her. She can only pay $10,000, which can either pay for one adult, she can pay for herself, or she can pay for two kids, Nami and Nojiko. Bellamere pays the 10,000, but she makes it clear to Arlong she wasn't paying for herself, she was paying for her daughters, Nami and Nojiko. And then Arlong has Bellamere shot in front of Nami and Nojiko because Bellamere couldn't afford to pay for herself. That is horrible when you think about it. The fact that Nami, at 10 years old, saw her adopted mother killed in front of her. Oh, and by the way, in 4Kids, they again changed things where Bellamere was forced to spend a life in prison instead. Just something small I thought I would include. But anyway, and to make matters worse, they discover Nami's map, the map that she made for herself, and they decide to take Nami too, despite everyone, including the whole village, trying to stop them, only to get beaten pretty bad. And Nami makes her way back into the village, and she looks absolutely devastated, but in her hand is a wad of money, saying that she joined Arlong's crew, and she's been given a job making maps for them. And nobody can believe this. The fact that Nami is working for her mother's killer. And Nami does come across as a bit cold, saying that she would rather live than die, even if it means who takes her in. However, we discover later that Nami only told Nojiko about this, but Nami tells Nojiko that she worked out a deal with Arlong. 100,000. If she can get 100,000... No, 100 million. It was 100 million. If Nami can get 100 million for Arlong, no matter how long it takes, she can buy back Kokoyashi Village, and Arlong and his men will leave. And keep in mind, Nami did this at the ripe age of 10. She scraped and saved, knowing that she would have enough by the time she's an adult. And Nami even went out to sea at a very young age. She was stealing from pirates and getting money however she could. And she did this at the ripe age of 10, getting money so eventually she would have enough to buy back Kokoyashi Village. So yeah, I think that Nami has the fourth saddest backstory out of all the Straw Hats for those reasons. Because our top three, sadly, they do have it a bit worse off than she did. Because some of them were actually a bit younger than Nami, and they suffered a bit longer than she did. Nami only suffered at Arlong's hands for 8 years, while some of the higher spots were younger and some of them suffered a bit longer than she did. Okay. Moving on. Usopp. I'm going to put Usopp at the number 9 spot, just above Zoro. Okay, Usopp's backstory is actually pretty tame when you really think about it. Usopp was born in Surf Village. He was born to Yasopp, who would eventually leave the village and become a member of the Red Hair Pirates. And even though he left his wife and his son, they were both still very proud of him. His mother literally said that she was proud to marry such a brave man, even though he left them. And Usopp heavily admired his father, to the point that, like Luffy, he wanted to be a pirate at a ripe young age. And what's even more devastating is that Usopp eventually goes to his mother, who is gravely ill, and and he sees her die when he's probably 10 years old, roughly the same age as Luffy, or 7 years. And for 10 straight years, Usopp was alone because his mother died. And every morning he would run out and tell that same lie that pirates are coming. Granted, he did do this having the hope that his father would come back for him. And I just want to point out that the villagers did appreciate Usopp, they really did. But I put Usopp above Zoro because Zoro still had a support system. He still had his sensei, while Usopp didn't have anybody. Yeah, the villagers did take care of him, but eventually they got tired of the lies and they would chase him every day, every morning when he told that same lie. And I just want to point out, yes, they knew the reason for it, and they did appreciate it, but there were some of them who were shown to actually be sick of the lie. And yeah, on the morning when Syrup Village was unknowingly saved from the Black Hat pirates, they did express a little bit of regret, thinking that they were too hard on Usopp. So yeah, that's why Usopp is actually ahead of Zoro. Because, because like I said, Zoro had a support system from his sensei, while Usopp, as far as we know, was kind of on his own. So, unpopular opinion, but if it means anything, if this was close, I probably would end up switching the two. But like I said, Zoro had a support system, Usopp didn't. Moving on. Sanji. Sanji was given 2 backstories, so he's kind of a difficult one to place. So you know what, I'm gonna kind of give a bit of a 2 different ranks when it comes to this. Sanji's first backstory when we meet him. When we first meet Sanji and get his backstory, we learn that he and the pirate Zeph, who eventually would go on to adopt and raise him, the fact that they end up stranded on an outcrop that had no vegetation, and if you fell off to try to catch fish, you fell off for good. Okay. Okay. And Zeph was able to save Sanji and 2 bags. One larger bag meant for him, and a smaller bag meant for Sanji. And he instructed Sanji to ration out the food, and eventually they would get picked up. Sanji was able to ration the food out, and here's a little perspective for all of you. Sanji and Zeph were stranded for 72 days, I think. That's just what I think off the top of my head. I know it was at least 70 days. If anyone knows the exact number or if I'm right, feel free to tell me down below. And eventually Sanji used up all his food, and he becomes desperate. He sees that Zeph still hasn't moved, nor has he even touched the bag. So Sanji, brandishing a knife that he brought with him, goes to take the food, only to discover that the bag was filled with treasure. Yeah, Zeph gave Sanji all the food. Yeah, think about that. And what's even more surprising is that Sanji discovers that Zeph is missing one of his legs, because as it turns out, Zeph cut off his own leg and had been eating it all that time so he could survive. Though in the anime they changed this a bit, where Sanji gets caught under the wreckage and Zeph sacrifices his leg so he can save Sanji. Personally, I kind of prefer that one, because it shows that Zeph already felt a fellowship with Sanji, even though they had just met. Okay, so I'm gonna give Sanji 2 rankings here. Now, if we stayed with this backstory, I would probably put Sanji at this spot right here, just under Luffy's. But then we get to Whole Cake Island and we're introduced to Sanji's real backstory. which is devastating. Sanji was born into the Vinsmoke family, and and he was meant to be a human weapon alongside his three other brothers. Yes, Sanji is the fourth youngest of five siblings, and he was born into quadruplets. So, but they were meant to be human weapons because Sanji's mother Sora took a drug that was meant to counteract the effects that would turn them into human soldiers. However, it only affected Sanji. Sanji's brothers had superhuman powers even though they were newborns, while Sanji had none of that. And what's even sadder is the fact that Sanji's father, Judge, was praising his other kids and horribly abusive towards Sanji, paying him almost no mind. In fact, if it wasn't for Sora and Sanji's sister Reiju, then Sanji would have had almost no one. Well, as it turns out, the drug that Sora took eventually took her life. It tampered with her health, and eventually she died when Sanji was probably 5 years old, 5 or 6. They never really gave us an age when it came to Sanji's age, when it comes to when Sanji went through that. But what's even sadder is the fact that Sanji wasn't even given time to grieve. His own father blamed Sanji for his mother's death, and he was very abusive. Sanji was abused by his father and his three brothers, and Reiju, even though she, on the surface, she supported the bullying, but behind closed doors, she did support him and heal him. It eventually got so bad that Judge actually faked Sanji's death, when in reality he sealed Sanji up in a jail cell and put an iron mask on his face, with the whole Jeremy kingdom believing Sanji to be dead. And keep in mind here, that his brothers have no human emotions. They were actually happy he was dead. That is, until they discovered he was still alive and actually went to his jail cell to beat him up. Eventually, the Jeremy Kingdom made their way to the East Blue, and Sanji told Reiju that he wanted nothing more than to get away, than to escape. So Reiju decided to help him by helping him escape. And eventually Sanji was able to get a key for his iron mask, but in doing so, he was met with his father, who agreed to let Sanji escape, on the condition that Sanji never give his family name. Symbolically, Judge was disowning Sanji, because he was considered that much of a disgrace to their family. So, if we just kept the first backstory, him almost starving to death, with Zeph, I would have ranked Sanji right here underneath Luffy. But, given the fact that we are given the Whole Cake Island backstory, I'm gonna put Sanji at the number 3 spot. Sanji has the third saddest backstory out of everybody. And yes, I ranked Sanji above Nami, because like I explained with her, Nami was 10 years old when she made the deal with Arlong and lost her mother, while Sanji was much younger when he was disowned and heavily abused by his own family. Think about that. So Sanji takes above Nami when it comes to sad backstory. Okay, Chopper. I would probably put Chopper in Sanji's first spot, underneath Luffy. Okay, taking inspiration from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and yes, Chopper has a blue nose instead of a red nose. Chopper was already an outcast in his dear herd. However, after he ate After he ate the human devil fruit and turned into a reindeer human, he was ousted not only by his own reindeer kind, but even by humans. They believed him to be a monster and actually shot at him. The only person who took any pity on him at this time was Dr. Hiralook, who tended to Chopper and allowed him to stay with him for a while. Chopper stayed with Dr. Hiralook for about a year, learning how to be a doctor and accompanying Dr. Hiralook when he went out to try and treat patients. However, Dr. Hiralook was dying, which is why after Chopper was already healed, Hiralook kicked him out so he could focus on his final work, making cherry blossoms bloom in their snow mountain, in their snow country of Drum Island. Then Chopper was given a bit of a misinformation when it comes to some mushrooms that Wapple's guards were talking about when they were hunting for doctors. Chopper heard that these mushrooms were a miracle cure and that they might even help save Dr. Hiralook. So Chopper took one of Dr. Hiralook's medical books and went to go find the Amidake mushroom, getting horribly beaten up when the alpha male, the stag or the buck from Chopper's old herd, attacked him. Chopper comes back to Dr. Hiralook, bleeding and bruised, but proud that he was able to save that mushroom for Dr. Hiralook. Dr. Hiralook tends to Chopper again and tearfully promises Chopper he will be a great doctor one day. And by this point, Wapple spread out this rumor. By this point, King Wapple, who ruled Drum Island, spread this rumor that the 20 MDs, his personal doctors, because he exiled all the others, were gravely ill. This was meant to be bait to lure Dr. Hiralook out. By this point, Dr. Hiralook already drank the Amidake mushroom in a soup. He did this to tend to Chopper's feelings. However, when Dr. Kureha came, a friend of Dr. Hiralook's who eventually would become Chopper's teacher, she came to Chopper and she discovered that Chopper gave Dr. Hiralook the Amidake mushroom, and she very tearfully tells Chopper that the mushroom is horribly poisonous. Yes, when you eat it, you're dead in less than half a day. And she tells Chopper that Dr. Hiralook ate the mushroom in order so Chopper's kindness wouldn't be wasted. And Chopper eventually goes to the castle to try and confront Dr. Hiralook and see if he can save him. But by that point, it's already too late. Hiralook is met by Wapple, the 20 MDs, and a mass of soldiers, along with Dalton, of course. And Wapple reveals that the entire thing was a trap, that the 20 MDs are perfectly healthy. And what's really interesting is that Dr. Hiralook isn't angry. He says, "I'm happy because this would have been a national crisis, having all the doctors be sick." And then Dr. Hiralook gives the iconic line, "A man dies when people forget him," before taking his own life, blowing himself up. But before that, he tells Wapple, "Very shortly a monster will be coming here. He's my son, so don't hurt him." Before that, he thanks Chopper for giving him a wonderful life, and then drinks an explosive, killing himself. Keep in mind here, Dr. Hiralook was dying anyway, and he had probably a year left to live anyway. The reason why he blew himself up is because he didn't want the mushroom to kill him and Chopper to feel guilty about it. So yeah. using up all my water here. And I still have to record my audiobook later. I ranked Chopper underneath Luffy because Chopper didn't kill. Dr. Heerlook wasn't dead because of Chopper, kind of like how Ace died protecting Luffy. This may be a bit of an unpopular opinion here, but Luffy suffered Luffy suffered a lot more because for 12 years he thought Sabo was dead, while Chopper, he spent 6 years of his life living with that guilt and living with Dr. Kureha. So that's kind of why I ranked Chopper kind of in this middle number 6 spot right here, because Luffy kind of went through a lot more. Because, like I said, Luffy kind of has 3 backstories. Shanks losing his arm, thinking Sabo's dead, and losing Ace. While Chopper, yeah, it's devastating losing his father figure, but still not as bad as believing both your brothers to be dead and all that. Okay. Let's be honest here. You all knew this was going to be one of the top 2. Robin. Robin earns her spot. No. Robin earns the number 1 spot. She officially takes the S for saddest. And there is a reason for this. Don't you worry, I will explain myself. This is going to be a bit of a tough one to get through. When Robin was 8 years old, her parents, who were archaeologists, left her at the hands of her mother's sister and her family in a very Harry Potter-esque way. Yes, they took Robin in, but they mistreated her and kind of ignored her half the time, always doting on their blood kid. And what's even sadder is that Robin was an outcast in her home village on Ohara. The only place where she felt truly welcomed was with the scholars of Ohara. They welcomed her as a scholar. She was always welcome in the library, the Tree of Knowledge, as they called it. I'm starting to lose my voice here. She was always welcomed in the Tree of Knowledge. But it's what happened later. Eventually, a giant known as Jaguar D. Saul landed on Ohara. But unbeknownst to Robin, he was actually a Marine Vice Admiral who deserted. And he was actually the one who helped Robin's mother, Olvia, escape. Because they were going through the horrible crime of studying the Void Century, the 100 years of history that is forgotten. Eventually, the Marines and their Buster Call made their way to Ohara, where Saul was able to save Robin, but sadly everybody else on the island, whether they were scholar or not, were meant to be eradicated. A Buster Call is where 5 Vice Admirals and 10 battleships come to the island and devastate it. They destroy everyone on it, even if some of their own people are still there. And Robin was just barely able to escape thanks to Saul sacrificing himself at the time. I mean, we believe that Saul was dead. Spoiler alert, turns out he's not. But for 20 years, Robin was on the run and believed Saul and everyone else in her life to be dead, at the age of 8 years old. Now, thanks to one of those Vice Admirals, Kuzan, who eventually would become Admiral Aokiji, that did help Robin escape. But sadly, it wasn't much of an escape, because Robin was given a 79 million bounty on her head, and the government spread propaganda that she destroyed 5 warships all on her own. Yeah. Robin, at the ripe age of 8 years old, lost everyone in her life, was branded a criminal at the age of 8, and spent 20 years of her life running from place to place. And in the anime, they actually showed this a bit, because whenever Robin found a place for her to hide, whenever she found people that would take her in, they would betray her. Hey, 79 million, and all you have to do is turn in one little 8-year-old girl. Sounds like easy money, am I right? And she's already a criminal, so no one would blame you. But at the same time, she's an 8-year-old girl who's been betrayed by the world itself. And for 20 years, she spent running and hiding. In fact, she had to work for pirates so she could be protected. That is, of course, until she found family with the Straw Hats. So Robin does have the saddest backstory. And I put her above both Sanji and Nami because, like I said, she suffered for 20 years. Nami was 10 years old and she worked for Arlong for 8 of them. Sanji was 5 and only suffered for a few years. While, like I said, Robin had to suffer 20 years running from the world. Okay, moving along. Okay, let's see here. Next up is our super cyborg, Franky. Now, I would actually rank Franky right here at the number 7 spot. And there is a reason for this. Okay, Franky was abandoned by his pirate parents. Yeah, that's a bit of a tongue twister. Pirate parents at a very young age. And he didn't really dwell on it for too long because he was taken in by the shipwright master Tom, who would go on to build the Oro Jackson Gold Roger King of the Pirate ship. So even though Franky had a hard life, he lived a very fulfilling young life, learning how to build battleships. Okay. But eventually Tom gets arrested by the world government for the crime of building the Oro Jackson for the Pirate King. However, Tom manages to get out of this by promising to build the sea train. So as kind of a probation for his sentence, they allow Tom to build the sea train. And for the next 14 years, Tom, Iceberg, and Franky would go on to construct the sea train, and it works. Took them 14 years, and it looks like Tom's sentence is going to be appealed, that he will be let go. But that being said, Tom, in his possession, had the blueprints for the battleship Pluton, and the world government, specifically Spandam from CP5, I think at the time, eventually he would go on to lead CP9, orchestrated basically Spandam took Franky's battleships and had them open fire on the judicial ship where Tom's trial was going to be held. And because Franky made them, it looked like Tom's company was responsible for the attack. I think Franky was actually in his 20s at the time of this. Let's see. Yeah, he was 26 when all this happened, so he was a bit older than Usopp and Zoro. But moving on. Tom, along with Iceberg and Franky, are brought before the judge, and Tom uses the pardon that the sea train gave him, and he uses the pardon to get them out of the attack that happened that day, meaning that Franky and Iceberg will walk free, but Tom will still pay for his crime of building the King of the Pirates ship. Okay. So, and eventually Tom is being taken to Ennie's lobby, where I'm assuming he's going to be executed. And what's even more poetic is that he's being taken there on the very same sea train, the Puffing Tom, that he created. And there we see Franky holding a cannon from one of his battleships, desperately firing it at the sea train to try and stop it, until finally the train hits Franky and mangles his body, forcing Franky to rebuild himself as a cyborg. But what really hit this home for me is the fact that Iceberg openly blamed Franky for the whole thing. Iceberg blamed Franky because Franky was the one who built the battleships in the first place. He even tells Franky that if Tom pays for this, I will never forgive you. Granted, they were both young and very emotional at the time, but for 8 years, Franky didn't build battleships. He even probably had an internalized hatred of ships because of what his battleships did. So for 8 years, Franky was traumatized because of what his ships did. The fact that he lost his master, the fact that his master was tried and probably executed for his crimes, the fact that his ships hurt people who he cared for and innocent people. But like I said, I ranked Franky a bit higher than these bottom 3 spots because Franky, even though he had trauma for 8 years, he was still a lot older than these guys. At the very least, Zoro and Usopp. He was a grown adult, and he did find a new purpose with his life when he started the Franky family. And eventually, with the help of Luffy and the Straw Hats, he would get over his trauma, he would build their ship, the Thousand Sunny, and join them as the shipwright. So like I said, Franky was older when he was traumatized, and his trauma was only for about 8 years. Okay. It should be pretty obvious who the number 2 spot belongs to. Yo ho ho ho! Humming Brook, or Sulking Brook. And there is a good reason why I put Brook at the number 2 spot. Explaining Brook's backstory, Brook joined the Rumbar Pirates, and during their trip from the West Blue to the Grand Line, they encountered a baby whale named Laboon. And even though they couldn't take Laboon with them, they made a promise to him at the Twin Capes that once they finished their journey, they would come back to Laboon. However, Brook's story takes place 50 years before One Piece takes place. And what's devastating is that his pirate captain, Yorkie, contracted a horrible disease and infected a lot of the other crewmates. So Brook had to become acting captain. They left Yorkie and the infected crewmates on their ship and continued their journey without them. Granted, this has kind of led to a bit of a fan theory that Yorkie may have found a cure after they drifted apart. But the real sad backstory comes afterwards. The Rumbar Pirates get into a battle against enemy pirates, and their weapons were coated in poison, and the ship's doctor was killed in the attack. So they all know that they're dying except for Brook, and their greatest regret was the fact that they couldn't go back to see Laboon. So the Rumbar Pirates decide to record their final song so Brook, once he comes back to life thanks to his devil fruit, will succeed them. He'll succeed their final promise to Laboon, go back and see him. And it is devastating. They are playing Bink Sake until finally it's all down to Brook. And Brook, it still gets me emotional. The fact that he's literally counting off the members of his crew left. It seems that we're down to a quartet. Now we're a trio. Duet. Solo. Solo, referring to him, by the way. Until finally Brook dies from his own injuries, but he does come back to life thanks to his devil fruit. But what's more devastating is that Brook would spend 50 years drifting on that ship because the rudder was damaged in the attack. Brook spent 50 years drifting in the Devil's Sea, taking inspiration from the Bermuda Triangle, and he spent his time there with the dead bodies of his crewmates. That is sad. And he spent 50 years drifting, and it's even implied that he may have suffered from loneliness at some point because he had dreams and delusions that his crewmates were still alive, still interacting with him, and he would do these kind of dumb little quirky things to keep himself entertained, and it becomes devastating when you realize he's all by himself. So the reason why I ranked Brook above everyone else and below Robin, because Brook was stuck there for 50 years. He was stuck in the Devil's Sea for 50 years, while Robin had to run from place to place for 20 years, which in my opinion is a bit sadder, because Robin was being betrayed by whoever would take her in. But like I said, the fact that Brook had to suffer for 50 years in the same place with the dead bodies of his crewmates. This might be another hot take here, but that's just my opinion. Brook was stuck in one place while Robin was running from place to place to get by and survive. Okay, now for the obvious last pick. The number 8 pick right here is Jinbe. No, I don't want to save or download. Okay. Jinbe was a lot older than Usopp and Zoro when his sad backstory happened. And in fact, he was a bit older than Franky too, I think, when it happened to him, but it's still pretty devastating. Jinbe joined the Sun Pirates under the man that he respected most, Fisher Tiger. And there was fishmen, discrimination, and prejudice everywhere. People believed that because they were fishmen, they were no different than actual fish themselves. But let's see here. People believed that because they were fishmen, they were no different than actual fish themselves. And how they were horribly, horribly mistreated. Basically, fishmen discrimination and prejudice. People believe that because fishmen, they believe that they're no different than fish, that they were inferior beings. And Jinbe joined up with Fisher Tiger, joining the Sun Pirates, because a good number of the Sun Pirates were escaped slaves that Fisher Tiger saved. Alright, let's see. Eventually, the Sun Pirates would come across a slave girl named Koala, and they were given the task of returning her to her home island. And it all works out. Koala is with them for a while, and eventually, and she even says herself that not all fishermen are bad. She would come to greatly respect the crew, especially Fisher Tiger. However, sadly, Koala's fellow villagers didn't see it that way. Unbeknownst to Lil Koala at the time, they alerted the Navy, and in exchange for not coming to take Koala away as a slave, they would capture the Sun Pirates. So, they attacked Fisher Tiger on his way back to his ship. And eventually they were able to get away by stealing a Navy ship of their own. But Tiger was horribly injured and he needed a blood transfusion in order to save himself. However, because they were on a Navy ship, the only blood that was available was human blood. And Fisher Tiger, on his deathbed, couldn't accept humans. He knows that everybody wants peace. He knows that nobody wants prejudice or discrimination. But because of the hatred he feels for himself, the hatred he feels towards humans, he can never accept their blood. And he dies shortly after, leaving Jinbe, Arlong, and the rest of the Sun Pirates devastated. Eventually, Jinbe becomes acting captain, And he does, and because Arlong went on his rampage, his revenge-fueled rampage, Jinbe has to become a warlord in order to release Arlong from prison. And Arlong even tells Jinbe that he needs to stop him right now because if he doesn't, he will take revenge for fishmen everywhere. And even though Jinbe beats the crap out of Arlong, he doesn't kill him. Instead, the Arlong pirates are separated from the Sun pirates. So the reason why I put Jinbe here is because he had to deal with discrimination all his life. And Jinbe was even abandoned by his parents. He, along with Arlong and probably Tiger 2, were all abandoned by their parents. Oh, I almost forgot. Tiger reveals that he was a slave to the world nobles too. That he was a slave to the celestial dragons. That being one of the main reasons why he couldn't accept the blood. Because he couldn't accept humans. He saw so many horrible things that he preferred to die than have human blood run through his veins. Okay. And that is pretty devastating, watching the man you saw as a big brother figure take care of you from a young age willingly die because he couldn't accept his demons. Okay. I do think that this is a bit sadder because Jinbe had to deal with prejudice and discrimination his entire life, while Zoro and Usopp, they stayed in their respective hometowns where for the most part they were well taken care of. But I do think that's a bit worse dealing with prejudice and discrimination. And like I said, I ranked Jinbe ahead of Usopp and Zoro because he was a lot older, so he could deal with it in his own way. And there's not much else to say. That's kind of my ranking for this list. If you have a change of heart, or how would you rank your own Straw Hat rankings? Who do you think had the saddest backstory? Who do you think had the least sad backstory? Feel free to tell me in the comments below. But like I said, this was just a fun what-if sort of thing. Just feel free to tell me. Anyway, everybody, if you like what you see, feel free to hit like, subscribe, all that good stuff. This is Jeremy Senpai, signing off. Until next time.